we're getting 9 lines at the same time from 2 different JTACs on 2 different radios, and I can't hear his, he can't hear mine. I turn it up to get his read back of the 9 line, not what the JTAC said, but what he said back. And then he turns mine up to get my read back. And like, okay, we have danger close strafe and a at night in the city and a show of force because it's too close to strafe. Like we need a jet over this like right now. Roll in and do this really low altitude show of force, and then pop up to do like a 5G pull, roll in to do a strafe pass danger close.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear round 1 of a 2-part combat story with former F-15E Strike Eagle Weapons Systems officer Mike Pako Benitez. In this episode, we follow Mike's very unlikely path to the cockpit that begins with a career in the Marine Corps as a helicopter mechanic and aircrew member in the very first push into Afghanistan to fighting in Iraq during Fallujah II. Mike's path is anything but direct, as he found his way to becoming an expert tactician and aviator in the F-15E, flying combat sorties in theater. Since retiring, Mike has gone on to create The Merge, themerge.co, newsletter, which has 20,000 subscribers, and podcast, which has 40 episodes as of this airing. The Merge brings defense and tech news and insights in a more lighthearted and interesting approach that I'm confident listeners of Combat Story will appreciate. We only found Pako thanks to former guest Ryan Stinger Fishel, who is a beneficiary of the tough love and tutelage of Pako. Stinger mentions in his interview a crusty old weapons officer during his time in uniform who made Stinger look info up as opposed to handing it to him. That was Pako. Stay tuned for a follow-on episode after rounds 1 and 2 with Pako to hear both Pako and Tom Gunny Moser be interviewed together about their experiences in Afghanistan and Syria leading units from the air. And with that, please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Mike Pako Benitez. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to come out to California and spend some time with us here.
Thanks for having me. This weather's great. Well, I've got here on the left coast.
Yeah, it's a little cold. It's a little colder than usual. One of the things that I like to start out with when we have pilots on here, especially fighter pilots, is the call sign.
Oh boy.
So I know this can be PG rated, could be R rated. What is yours? Where does it come from? As much as you can share.
All right. First of all, backseater, not front seater. I've been on a couple of podcasts and they've always asked me that. I've always kind of pleaded the fifth. But you know what? I'll tell you the story. I'll tell you a story. So my call sign is Pako. It's spelled Pako, not with a C, it's with a K. And it's an acronym. And as with most stories and call signs in real life, you get them for doing bad things or wrong things, not great things. I got my call sign on my first TDY after I was mission ready. I was a young lieutenant, first fighter squadron, youngish lieutenant. We'll talk about that later. And I'm like, well, I really want to fit in, and and I didn't drink a lot or anything like that, just based on where I was in my life. So we go on this trip. We go up to Mountain Home and we land there. We're supposed to be air spares for deployment for this other squadron, so we just have to fly jets up there. We land, they go, "Are the jets good?" Like, "Yep, jets are good." Like, "All right, they're code 1. Like, we'll see you at the end of the week." Like, "Well, what do you mean?" Like, "Well, you're not flying them here because like you're going to break them if you fly them." So we have, there's 8 of us there. We flew 4 jets up there, and so we had free time. So we explored the space, went out, did stuff, and towards the end of the week, they were having this going away from one of the squadrons, one of the sister squadrons in the base. And so they had organized this massive bar crawl in Boise. And when I say massive, it was probably like 50 people. And it was all mapped out, and we go to this bar and then this
all
bar. All
pilots?
Yeah. It was a whole, it was basically 2 full fighter squadrons of people doing this bar crawl through Boise. And we're the out of towners, and they're the Strike Eagle guys just like us. I don't know almost anyone, just the guys that were in my squadron because I'm new. And we go out. I'm like, "Oh, well, what am I supposed to do? Like, I don't drink that much." And this guy is with me. He orders this Long Island, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I guess I'll try that." So I'm like, "Oh, this is pretty good." Like, I think I'll just have these all night. So we go, yada yada yada. many bars and time later, I'm still drinking the same. Like I just keep drinking Long Island's. I'm like, oh,
those have so much alcohol in
yeah,
it.
they're so good. Turns out too much alcohol. And so I'm at this bar and things get a little out of control and I puke all over this this outside upstairs like balcony. And I'm pretty sure it had like these like the wood, spacers, and so then it kind of
it's fallen down to the next level.
I'm pretty sure it's been a while, but I'm pretty sure I don't remember some of those details, but I do remember that I puked and got kicked out. And so that's where the call sign came from.
Puked and kicked out.
Puked and kicked out. So that's what it really stands for. I wish I had a better story.
That's a good one.
But the rest of the story is, I think it was actually like the best thing that ever happened to me, because remember I told you we were kind of exploring the space. We had already booked a whitewater rafting trip at 5 a.m. after this bar crawl. And so with our out of town, folks, so we all show up and people are just like getting sick in the corner and like the parking garage and pulling over on the drive to get to the whitewater rafting. And it's whitewater rafting. So there's people just getting sick all over, all down the river. And I'm feeling great.
Because you've already done this.
Yeah.
You had your time last night.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Yeah. And I feel like a bunch of pilots aren't going for the easy rapids either. It's probably the harder.
Yeah. What's the hardest one?
Yeah.
Sign us up for
Let's
that.
do that at 5 a.m. tomorrow. Yeah. Oh, geez. That is a good one. That's a good one. I know Stingers was pretty tough. He didn't share that on air, but shared it with me later. So that was, I'd say, almost X-rated. Gunny. So folks listening, if you haven't heard the interview we did with Tom Moser, Gunny was I feel like a great one to have. It's
so fitting. You could look at him and you can just look at him and go, yep. Okay.
Yeah. For those who didn't see Tom, like if you were just listening, you just got to imagine like the flat top, square jaw, tough Gunny type guy.
Yeah. Did he tell you when he was a lieutenant? And he's an Air Force lieutenant and he used to work in scheduling, and the new people would check in and they'd be like, oh, go report to Gunny. And he would turn around and be like, he's got a great story. He'd probably tell it better than me. He's like, what do you want? What are you doing in my office? And not realizing he's a lieutenant, yelling at him because he was much older.
Because he looked like
and they're like, yes,
major.
sir. Yes, sir. It's like, I'm just fucking with you.
He said he'd be walking around and he'd get salutes from like majors.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right. You don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's, I'm always interested as we talk to pilots, just when does aviation come into your life? Do you get bitten by that aviation bug early on?
Oh man. I've got a weird story.
That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. So I think what people want to hear is that, when I was 5 years old, I looked up at the sky. There was this thing moving and it had this glint and off the canopy, none of that happened with me. None of it. So, my story of my life is I just kind of like been fumbling through things and things just happen to work out. And I'm either in the right place at the right time or I've been in the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on, if you're an optimist or not. My aviation started in the Marine Corps. So I joined the Marine Corps out of high school and I joined the Marine Corps. I still don't exactly know why, I guess.
Huh.
I wasn't. Well, I kind of know why, but I got to tell you that story to tell you the
we're
Air
coming
Force
back.
story. Yeah, we'll come back to it. So I ended up, I was in high school, played sports, and didn't really know what I wanted to do. And like, I want to do something hard. And a friend of mine was like, oh, I enlisted in the Marine Corps. My buddy's brother's in the Marine Corps, so it's great. I'm like, oh, cool. And I'm a senior in high school. I'm like, what? I've never heard of this thing. What is this? Marine Corps? Like, no.
Wow.
Silent Corps, like Corps. I'm like, oh, I never heard of it. So like when I tell you, I stumble through things, I've stumbled through a lot of things. So I joined the Marine Corps under an aviation maintenance contract. So I did that. So I was a mechanic on helicopters.
But even that's aviation.
It is.
Right? Like,
but that was based on what I don't want to do, not what I did want to do. Right. So like, I didn't want to be in the infantry. It sounded like probably not what I really wanted to do. But I figured if I do this other thing, it'll give me some like tech skills. It'll get the most of the good stuff and maybe minimize some of the not so good stuff. And so it wasn't really that I had a passion for aviation. It was just like, yeah, it seemed like the good hedge bet to make.
Okay. Well, I want to rewind. Growing up, you didn't have, I guess, the military family background, it sounds like.
Turns out I did. It just didn't exist. I didn't know about it. So it wasn't until after I had talked to my parents. I'm like, hey, this is what I want to do. And they're like, why? I'm like, well, I think this is what I need to do. It wasn't until after I like enlisted, like, oh yeah, your grandfather, he was he was in the Army in World War II. I'm like, no, you didn't tell me that. They're like, oh yeah, and your other grandfather, like he was actually in the Navy in World War II. I'm like, nope, didn't tell me that either. Like, and so my one of them had passed and one of them was still around. So the one that had been in the Navy, he wrote me a nice long letter about being in the military and stuff.
Cool.
I was like, oh, like, so here I am, like in high school, senior year of high school, didn't even know that my grandparents were ever even in the military. The word military never came up in any conversation during my entire upbringing.
No way. What would you have done like if you hadn't gone into the military? Like, what would your life? Where would you have?
I have no idea. No idea.
And obviously, there's a lot of options when you go to a recruiter. Did you even like go and talk to the Army or?
No, I didn't talk to anyone. I walked in. I was like, hey, like this guy here says this Marine Corps thing is kind of cool. Like, well, like tell me about it.
That recruiter's got to be like, yes,
they're
come
like,
on in.
Yeah, like it's like, oh, you got to take this test, and then the ASVAB, come take this test. Never heard of this test. Like, it'll be fine. Like, just sign up for the test, take the test, and we'll talk. And so I took the test, and he's like, sit down. Like your scores are really good. What do you want to do? You can do anything you want. And I was like, oh, like, what do you think I should do? It's it's very much like just feeling my way out.
Was the plan there like, hey, I'll do 4 years, get money for college, hop out?
I didn't have a plan, right? So I said, well, I'll go do this and then I'll figure it out. And at the time, and I have no idea why, but at the time I was like, oh, aviation, Marine Corps. I'm in Florida. I'm like, I think I'll be stationed in Pensacola. Like that probably sounds like right. Like didn't actually like validate that on anything. And this is the 90s. So it's not like, the internet's probably not my go-to source yet because it's not really that well used. So yada, 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 I ended up at Camp Lejeune.
Were your parents concerned that you were signing up? I mean, it was the 90s, right? So we weren't at war like we were post 9/11, or it wasn't Vietnam for sure.
Oh, there was definitely like where is this coming from? Like, what do you mean? Like, you've never been talking about this. What's going on? They actually had a family friend who was an Army colonel at the time. They actually brought him over to talk to me. He's like, oh, tell me about why you want to join the military. Like, why did you join the military? So,
back at you.
Yeah. So it was good to, they cared and they brought some people in. We had a friend at our church who was a Marine lieutenant colonel. So I talked to him a little bit and I was like, okay, again, crazy. And I'll put a pin in this. We'll come back to it about, these two other people that happened to go to this tiny church that I went to. I'll get back to that. Okay. How I got into the Air Force.
Make sure I don't lose that thread. All right.
Sorry, bouncing around a little bit.
This is great. This is great. So as you said, like you're playing sports, you want to do something tough. You go to the Marines. Like when you're at boot camp, is your calculus like maybe I shouldn't have done this?
I was like, oh, this is challenging. You get through the phases of like, did I just make a mistake? Everyone has that, right? It was interesting. Like some of the things, like I was pretty athletic. I played baseball mostly, a little bit of football, mostly baseball. Growing up in Florida, there's no off season, so just one season to the next, just change your jersey and keep going. Right?
Yeah.
Those who in Florida and play baseball know exactly.
They know.
They know. So I went to basic training pretty healthy, but not really like. I didn't, focus on it too much, but did pretty good. One of the things that I didn't really think too far ahead. Turns out every Marine is a rifleman. You ever heard that?
Just once or twice.
Once or twice.
Yeah.
So I went into boot camp having not only never shot a weapon, never touched a weapon in my whole life. So that was as I'm marching around with this weapon every day, realizing like, hey, I'm like, a month and a half or so, I'm going to have to start like qualifying on like with this thing and shooting like these targets at very, very long ranges, by the way. I'm like, I don't know how this is going to work out.
Did you get up to speed pretty quick?
Yeah, it turns out the process of teaching people how to shoot works pretty good. So I was, again, never shot a weapon my whole life. Qualified expert. So near the top of my platoon, I've been I shot expert every weapons qualification for every weapon I ever touched in the military. And the only time I really ever shoot is when I got to go to the qualify every year.
Actually, my experience was fairly similar. Like I had touched a weapon a little bit before, but I didn't grow up hunting in the woods. And I could shoot when like put on a range and kind of execute what I had been taught. But just for people listening, like we've had, I remember, I think it was Eddie Penny, a DevGru operator who was a Marine first. And he was struggling to make expert on that. So it's no small feat, I think, to be shooting expert, especially never having picked up a weapon.
Yeah, and I remember when the first time you actually get on the range, they don't give you any rounds. You're doing a grass week. We're just going through all the process, the procedures to make sure like everyone's going to be safe because you're doing this in like mass, right? And one mistake, right? Safety. So they have a grass week. You go through all the procedures, and I remember like sighting in. It's like, okay, you're going to start. Here's the closest you're going to be. You're going to be standing 200 yards with your rifle. Like, and you have to hit this like man-sized target. Like that's how it starts. And then it gets worse. I'm like, what? So we're like trying to like, you're standing and trying to sight it. And then you kind of, okay, I can use the sling and try to like brace yourself and stabilize it. Then you back up to 300 yards and it's like kneeling or something like that. And then you back up to 500 yards and it's like, it's prone. Well, and this is iron sights. There's no scope. Never done this before. And I remember the first time I laid down at 500 yards with an M16 looking at the target, the post, the sight post on the weapon is bigger than the entire target to include like the frame, everything. How am I supposed to hit? And you're getting scored on how close inside of the silhouette it is. But the sight post covers the silhouette, the paper, the frame. It covers everything. Like, how is this even possible? But yeah, it's they teach you how to do it, and you adjust for clicks and winds and how you do all that. And yeah,
was your ability to kind of get up to speed there based on, I don't know, was it you just wanted to kind of finish at the top of the class? Was it you just had an aptitude for learning things quickly? Like what was driving you at that point?
Failure. So one of the things that's always stuck with me is when I was in high school, I was pretty good at baseball, not the best, but I was pretty good. And when I was in 9th grade, I'd made a cut to join there's two teams that happened. One of them was like a traveling team, and it was like next level, like baseball. And then the high school team, we had like a state championship baseball team. So I was one of two people who made this, 9th graders who made this, like playing with the 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. And this is a very competitive.
Yeah, that's
area.
No joke. Yeah.
And I did okay, not going to start, but I did okay. And as a backup catcher for a while, 10th grade, made the high school team. And the way that the high school was organized at the time was 10, 11, 12. Your 11th and 12th graders are, obviously like the state champions. And so I think there was like 4 people in the whole school made it 10th grade. And I made that. And I was like, I'm doing good. Well, then I kind of lost sight of, hard work, like input, output. And I took it for granted. And I came back the next season in 11th and actually got cut from the team.
Whoa.
Like in like halfway through the practice, like not even the first game, like because every year you have to try out for your spot. And so I actually got cut from the team after I had this like pretty good track record and trajectory. And that was a pretty good wake up call about hard work and what does failure feel like. So I took that with me, and I still take it with me, and I use that to. I don't think about it a lot, but that's, if I could go back to like why am I so driven about certain things, like that's it. It's like I like feeling failure, like that's terrible.
Because you could also just lose something in a heartbeat.
Yeah, don't take anything for granted.
Wow. Were you kind of skating at that time, like for those 11th grade practices? Were you
Yeah,
noticeably different?
I didn't put in the work in the off season. I showed up and I was like the guys that were like probably like, neck and neck with me at the end of the last season. Like we showed up to like practice for the next season, and you could tell if they had put in the sets and reps, and they were like, oh, like I'm just trying to keep up with these guys. So it was very humbling, and I appreciate it. At the time I was like, this is terrible. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do now. I ended up playing some baseball at a lower level. I don't know what you call it, but a lower, not at the school, like my 11th, the rest of my 11th and a little bit 12th, I think, grade. And I actually had, unbeknownst to me at the time, I actually had one or two like scholarship offers. My dad just never told me.
Really? Why?
Because I'd already decided that I was going to do this Marine Corps thing. And he's like, well, I'll just let you do that.
Really?
So, yeah. I didn't find out till like a year or two later.
Would you have wanted to do that?
Well, I was a little bit like, what do you mean? There was another out there. There was something else out there. So yeah, everything happens for a reason. So.
Did you go back and play in 12th grade or no? On the high school
I think
team?
I played like, no, not for high school. I was doing
man, that's a tough break.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a little bit of that drive, I guess, when you're at boot camp and going through this.
Yeah, so like all the water survival stuff, which is that's no joke either, and weapons and all the other stuff. And so I did pretty good. I got a merit. I came as an E1, got a meritorious promotion. Was one of the top guys in my class. So I graduated as an E2 in 1997. Yeah.
Did you want to, after seeing a little bit more of the Marine Corps, did you want to go that infantryman route, or were you kind of like, aviation, this will be cool?
Well, I think by the time I got through that, I was like, okay, and then you go through MCT and Camp Geiger. That's it's like a couple week infantry type course. Kind of gives everyone like basic exposure. And I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. Like living out in the field for a week or two at a time and walking around in the dark and like, yeah, like not my thing. Like I know I always had an eye of like that's not an extensible skill that I could see. Obviously, there's a lot of intangible skills that in that. At the time, I'm like, I'm glad I have this other thing going on. So, then I got into obviously helicopter mechanics. So I was actually you have your tail rotor here. It's one of the many things I used to work on. So I was a dynamic component mechanic, which is a fancy way of saying the pieces and parts of a helicopter that move, like the flight controls, the rotor heads, the blades, like anything in the helicopter that moves, that lets it fly, is what I fix. Gearboxes. So that was my job.
How much of a leg up did that give you when you went into the Air Force?
0.
Really?
0.
Just understanding of.
Well, I'd say 0. A little bit eventually, because I could, because I worked in maintenance, and even though Air Force aviation maintenance is completely different than the Marine Corps. It gave me empathy, right? Like, why is this jet broke? Like, no, like there's 1,000 reasons of why the jet's broke. Like it's not the guy's fault here that's at the jet, right? Like sometimes there's things that just happen, right?
I mean, like your story of never having picked up a weapon. I remember going to flight school and never having seen an engine, like even a car engine I'd never worked on. Oh. And so they bring us in and they got like a Rolls Royce engine in the corner. And it's like, all right, you're going to learn everything about this. And a lot of the guys had been working on their dad's cars or rebuilt something from the ground up. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's easy. It's suck, squeeze, bang, blow. That's all you got to know. That's it. That's it. That's jet engine mechanics 101.
That's great. So it's late 90s. And I mean, when 9/11 happens, you're still in the Marine Corps, right?
Yeah. So I was, so that's a good segue. So I was doing that, and so we're fixing the parts that go on the helicopters, but we're not directly in the helicopter squadrons. We're in the eye level squadron. So like there's the squadron maintenance, and then if they can't fix it, they just replace the part. The part goes to you. It's kind of like the back shop, and we were right next door to all the flying squadrons in this big line of helicopter squadrons, and we're looking at deployment. So I was originally going to go on deployment in 98, 99. And I ended up trading positions because our shop had like so many people, and at the time it was like there was always the 6-month cruise, like the med cruise we called it. Like the Marines, the MEU would go out 6 months at a time. There's 3 MEUs, one's gone, one's getting back and reconstituting, and one's preparing. And then you basically divvy up the shop, and we have 3 people that had to be committed for each one. So you can kind of plan it out for the next like 2 years of which deployment rotation, which is great for like stability. So I ended up was supposed to go on a deployment in 99. I traded it to go on a deployment later. And I can't remember exactly why I did that. But what I do remember is that deployment ended up being the MEU that ended up going into Kosovo and Macedonia and all of that. So, and this is the 90s. So those guys came back with like actual like experience and like combat action. And I'm like, what? Like, and the guys in our shop had, so even though we're mechanics, had also done aerial observer upgrades. So you can be a door gunner. So you augment the crew. So they had gotten to do all of this, came back and like, what did I just trade away? Like that was it. That was the one thing that's going to happen during my military career. And I just traded it away. And like, man, like, well, I'm going on this other deployment in September of 2001. That was the date. And this is in 99 or something, right? So I already knew I was going on deployment September 2001.
But to be clear, that's a very real fear in the 90s. It's like
it was.
You might only get 3 months of combat if you're lucky in your whole career, based on how things had looked at the time.
Yeah, it was a completely different mentality than what existed, obviously through GWAT. So I decided, I was like, okay, well, I want to do what these guys did, and I want to go and embed with the squadron, do my upgrade, get my wings, and I'll be an AO on a CH-46, which was like the way the squadrons were organized at the time. That was like the core unit that had the most helicopters. I'm like, that makes the most sense.
So you'll go to squadron level maintenance, basically. Like you'll be.
No, I would go down there to embed with the aircrew to go do like fly days. So pre-flight, fly, post-flight. And then I would come back and do the work at the squadron. But as a side benefit, because they didn't know if they could just call me if they needed something, I can come down there and help them with other things like outside of the normal process. So it'd be pretty good win-win. Yeah. So that was the story. And I remember 9/11 because it was getting really close to deployment time. And it was like the last doctor's appointment. It was like a well baby checkup for our daughter, and our first kid at the time. So she was like one. Yeah, she's a little bit over 1. Maybe like, I don't know, maybe it was her 18-month checkup as I'm thinking about it. Anyways, it was one of those well baby checkups, and it was September 11th. It was in the morning. And so we get in the car and we're listening to like this morning show, a North Carolina morning show. And they were talking about this, you start a car and you're hearing a conversation, like you don't know like where it started or like the context. And so, and this morning show, these 2 guys, I was joking around, they're start talking about this thing and like, oh yeah, my plane crashed into the building and this and that. I'm like, oh, okay. Like not thinking anything of it. And they keep like dwelling on it and talking about it. And it was like, 10 minutes into my drive to Camp Lejeune, which is where the hospital was, where we were going. I'm like, huh, like it's weird. Like this is real. And then they have to go like, hey, for those that just tuned in, it turns out like I tuned in 20 minutes ago and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Yeah, this is happening. This just happened. Like breaking news. Like we interrupted the show. Like, oh, everyone's at this point. It's like, it's just an accident. Like we don't know what's going on. I'm in the waiting room at the hospital, like everyone's watching the TV, and like the second plane hits. And I'm like, oh, like what, like this, something is really going on right now. So by the time we had left the base, they had the sentries and like the gate guards and stuff were all out there, and the base conditions had changed. And for people may not believe this, but there was a time that before 9/11, like the flow of traffic on the base was like the number one priority. They would just let everyone on base in rush hour and let everyone off base when it was time to leave, and they wouldn't check anyone's IDs. You had a sticker. It was like red, blue, green, black. But yeah, remember the stickers you used to put on your windshield, and they just look at the sticker and you just keep driving. Like you could just go print that out at Walmart. Like it was such a, yeah. But then that was like, yeah, then the gate guards, and then we had people still trying to figure that out. So it was like hour-long lines to get on base, like starting the next day. And then we actually got called. So I got back. There's no cell phones back then, so I got back home, and I call my work. I'm like, what's going on? Because we're supposed to deploy in like the next couple of days, anyways. Like, hey, pack your stuff in the hangar tomorrow morning. Like we're leaving early. I'm like, okay. So pack all our stuff. I'm like, okay, it's September 12th now.
And you're tying this together like it's a result of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they don't say anything. Like, where are we going? Like everyone's going to show up. Like we have the ship. Because as soon as 9/11 like when it happened, they sent in on the East Coast, they sent all of the ships out to sea. So get out of the ports. And so, scatter. So the plan was like, well, we're going to bring the ship down. We're going to transload the transport helicopters, not the attack helicopters, just the transport helicopters onto the ship. And this was the USS Baton. So it was LHD class. For people who don't know, the LHD classes, they double as hospital ships. So they were actually going to turn the Baton into a hospital ship and take it up to New York City and then use the infantry and the helicopters to start digging people out. That was the original plan on September 12th. So we are in the hangars. We've said our goodbyes on September 12th. We're in our sticks, our chocks and everything are all mapped out. The helicopters are running and they're like, okay, like can't, everyone go home. Like our mission has changed. I'm like, okay. It's like, we're going to deploy. And it was like 8 days. So they'd bring the ship back and restock it, get ready for deployment. So we left, I don't know, like September 18th, 19th, something like that. And then we set sail across the Med and everyone's like, I don't know what's going on. Like no one really knows.
You didn't know where you were going yet.
Yeah, we didn't really know. And we ended up stopping. Like, do we do our planned exercise schedule or not? And we actually started. So I think we started in Egypt. We were in Egypt. Yeah, we were in Egypt. And this Marine 1-star at the time, he was in charge we basically built a brigade, which was like unheard of at the time. So if you take 2 MEUs and put them together, you have a brigade. Well, this 1-star's name was Mattis. So first time I met him was as a 1-star. Yeah. So we're in Egypt for an exercise. We get just enough to get started. Like, I don't know, 2 days into it. And like, all right, everyone back on the boat. We're going through the Suez. So we end up going through the Suez. Interestingly enough, I pinned on E5. I got my promotion ceremony was like going through. Actually, hold on. No, I reenlisted going through the Suez Canal.
That's cool.
Yeah, I reenlisted going through the Suez Canal, and there's a whole reason why I reenlisted at the time. But I couldn't really. I didn't position myself to get out. Mary said, "Hey, what do you want to do?" I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, it turns out like I don't know is not a good strategy. So we had we had a daughter at that point, and we were didn't know what I wanted to do. Like didn't know like how do I get out of the military now that I'm in, and like these skills that I'm trying to like build here for like being an aviation mechanic. Like where can I get a job as an aviation mechanic? And turns out you actually need some A&P licensing, which is a whole thing I hadn't considered. And so I'm like, oh. So I was like, well, I need to get serious about what we're going to do. I can't. Let's reenlist. We'll take a very, very small bonus, help it to pay off some credit cards and stuff that we had rang up because we're young and dumb.
That's right.
It's just enlisted 101, yeah. Right?
Same with junior officer 101.
Yeah, it turns out.
Yeah.
Just more money, more problems.
Just a quick thanks to our sponsor, HelloFresh, and we'll get right back to this combat story. Our family still eats HelloFresh every week for at least 3 to 4 meals. We've used it for over 3 years to help prepare delicious meals for our family of 5, and I was an avid user before they sponsored us. HelloFresh has over 45 recipes, more than 100 seasonal add-on items to choose from every week, so it's easier to find something everyone will enjoy. This is one of the main selling points for our family, the variety. It's incredibly rare for us to eat the same meal 2 weeks in a row, which used to be our lives. After a full day of work, there's still so much to do. Some days it feels like eating a wholesome dinner is next to impossible, but with HelloFresh, you can turn busy weeknights into crowd favorite meal times with delicious, practical options designed to save you time. Like their 15-minute meals, which I do every week when my kids have guitar lessons at the house, so we can eat a real meal before the festivities start. So go to HelloFresh.com/combatstoryfree. Use the code combatstoryfree for free breakfast for life. 1 breakfast item per box while the subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com/combatstoryfree with the code combatstoryfree. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. And now back to this combat story.
So we end up going to Afghanistan in 2001.
So can you, and you're, maybe just for people's awareness, like you're a mechanic, but you're also part of the air crew now, as you described. What type of role might you do, and what is the airframe we're talking about?
So on this deployment, it was a CH4. So mechanic wise, I worked on the CH-46, the CH-53E, the UH-1, and the AH-1. So Huey and Cobra. So
like everything.
So
pretty much.
Yeah. So the way it was organized, like I was the head mechanic for all of those things for the entire like rotary wing for the deployment.
Jeez.
For those moving pieces,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
And then I got qualified to fly on the CH-46 as an enlisted aircrew, and I would either, it depends on if it was a 2 crew, you'd have the crew chief. The crew chief mans the crew door, and so as the AO, I would man the opposite side. So the helicopter's pretty big, as you probably
know. For the
know.
46.
Yeah, 46. Yeah. And so you're looking at like rotor lengths and clearing like left, below, and the guy on the right's clearing right and below. And then you have your fields of fire for weapons and things like that. Got to do some cool things. And then when you have 3, you have like your roaming guy who would usually be at the back or kind of helping with cargo. And so it's either a 2 crew or 3 crew setup at the time.
How was your shooting on the door gun?
Yeah, it's
was it also expert?
I tell you, we did have. It's one of those things like, yeah, I can't believe this is a thing. So this is like the 90s. We're getting qualified. Like, well, how do you get qualified on a machine gun that's moving sideways at 80 knots through the air, hitting these targets? Like, oh, well, you just figure it out. It's in the trajectory. It's been a while, but it was the right gun versus the left gun. You have to aim like low and right or high and left, and that because the bullet's spinning through the air while it's moving sideways, and so you kind of have to start there and kind of walk the bullets on. But I remember doing the qualification, and I still can't believe like they let us do this. Like, hey, we have this. It was in New River, on the East Coast. Is back in the 90s. Like, hey, this qualification, you're gonna have to shoot these robotic boats that are gonna be zigzagging all across the bay. So your job is and it's a night mission. They have tracers. They have these like unmanned boats that are kind of going all over. I'm like, wait, so like my qualification is I have to shoot them all? They're like, yeah. Okay.
Oh, that's cool. All right. Yeah. So when you're on the ship, obviously this is before a lot of the comms capabilities we have now. How are you talking back home as you're going into Afghanistan?
Ooh, they did have email back then on the ship, which is crazy, right? I think 2001. So it was like a daily, jump on, send an email, get an email. And they would shut and they still do to this day. They'd shut the external comms off when they didn't want people, things were going on. They didn't want anything going out. There's probably some letters, if I remember back correctly. And then when we got off the ship, there's no email, right? It's just like, there's nothing because it's the beginning. So we ended up in.
Yeah. Where'd you go? You're front end of this invasion.
Yeah. So in the beginning, I wasn't part of the 26th MU from the East Coast. On the West Coast was I believe it was the 15th MU. They have the 3. The 15th was deployed at the time. They were closer. So they actually were slightly in front of us. The 2 MUs combined to become the MEB, which is what I was talking about earlier. So the 15th MU was probably, I don't know, 2 weeks or something like that, maybe in front of us because they were just closer. So we got there and we basically set up kind of a logistics leapfrog up into Afghanistan off the boat. So we started in Pakistan. There was a place in the beach that we were bringing things in through like the LCAC and rotary wing, and then Rhino, FOB Rhino, if you've ever heard of that. That was early on as a staging location. Yep, been there. That was, and then up into Kandahar. So part of our mission. Oh, by the way, for context, like Enduring Freedom didn't have the name yet. So it wasn't. Its first name was Infinite Justice. It was Operation Infinite Justice, and they that lasted like, I don't know, 48 hours or something like that, and then they renamed it because it was got a lot of backlash. So
it's like a Jeopardy question one day, right there.
That's a Jeopardy question,
folks.
Yeah. So they watered it down and called it Enduring Freedom. So it's not infinite; it's just enduring. It's not justice; it's freedom. That's how it came.
I could just imagine at the Pentagon people hammering this one out,
hammering that out.
Yeah.
So you have Enduring Freedom was the overall, like that's the name. Well, Operation Swift Freedom was the invasion from the South. So we were part of the group that was the invasion of the South. there's great stories, heroic stories about what was going on in the north. We were in the south, traditional, mostly traditional. So we end up in Kandahar. So we do the airfield seizure there. The 82nd Airborne, I think at this point is probably like 6 to 8 weeks behind us because we knew that they were going to be coming. They weren't there yet. So we did that. And then we used Kandahar as a staging to kind of do raids and things like that. So we probably, I don't know, did a bunch of raids, probably collected like 400 or 500 prisoners, something like that.
Dude, can you talk through like your first one that you remember?
Oh,
I mean, how old are you at the time?
Oh,
22 maybe?
It's probably like that.
Yeah.
Like 21, 22.
Like at the beginning of this war.
And everyone, it's new to everyone,
Yeah.
right? Whether you're like the lieutenant colonel or the lieutenant or the lance corporal, it's like, this is uncharted territory for everyone. So there's no one to go to that's like, oh yeah, well here's what here in my experience.
When I was,
it's none of that.
Yeah. What was like it?
Like we didn't even have like, if I remember right, we were just trying to share like tan flight suits. Like we didn't have anything. We actually, we were in Kandahar. So now it's the winter. It's actually cold. Turns out, we have no cold weather gear. Like it's, yeah. We had, I probably went like a month without a shower. Like there's no like facilities. We had we were getting rationed a bottle of water and an emery a day. Like that was our like foods, your sustainment. Here it is, like make it last. And it'd get so cold at night, like your bottle of water would freeze. So you'd try to sleep with it so it wouldn't freeze too much because you'd have to wait for it to thaw out before you could drink it. Right. So you try to keep your bottle of water from freezing overnight.
Man, well, take us through one of the raids that you did. I mean, early on, what is that like, and what was your kind of position on that?
So left gun, so man that. Most of them were pretty benign. There was some of them were just like insertion extraction, which sounds like a little weird. So I remember, and this is 2001. There's this scene in Black Hawk Down, which is a fairly new movie at the time, where there's this helicopters that are kind of out in the middle of nowhere and they land. And there's a guy they just pick up in the middle of nowhere and he just kind of gets on the helicopter. And then like that literally happened to me. We're going on this mission. Like we're going to pick up this, we have to go to this thing to go pick up some packs. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I don't know anything. I'm like, sure. I'm just here for a ride and like, clear the left and got the gun. And we're out somewhere, I don't know, somewhere within 100 miles of Kandahar, middle of nowhere. And there's land as a guy, just a guy there, just pick him up.
And no idea, talk to this person.
No idea. Then turned, to find out like we have like, I'm guessing, well, yeah, it's probably CIA, but we had, guys with like dune buggies that were insertion all over the place that are like, these are clearly not military people. Like, yeah, I got some good pictures. Task Force K-Bar, Task Force 58. So it was like combined, like in the very beginning. So you had a lot of operators there from all different countries. We had Aussies there and like in the very, very beginning, I remember them like, hey, these guys have a funny accent. Like, yeah, they're all here to help. So like, yeah, it was interesting to be there in the very beginning.
Was it any, a lot of the guys I've interviewed, and myself included, the first time you go into combat, you're kind of like, oh my God, it's going to be World War III. Like you're going to see stuff all over the place and then it can be pretty benign. But then it was so early. Like when I went downrange, we'd been at war for several years. Like you were at the very beginning of it. So like that first time you're going outside the wire, I guess, are you just thinking all hell's going to break loose in a few minutes?
No, we're like, well, there's bad guys out there and, people are giving us intelligence. We're going to go and, door knocking at these different places. We got to bring the people to go knock on the doors. Like, okay, that sounds directionally correct to me. Like, let's go. I remember we did a day raid once and we landed in some really soft sand, and the way that the helicopter settled, we got the guys at the back out, and the way that it settled, like the guns only go so far up, obviously because of the rotors, and then only so far forward and aft because of the way the gun mount is. Well, the way that the helicopter had settled, like I think it was the crew chief's gun, it was the right gun, I believe. Like it couldn't actually like, there was no coverage on the right and it's locked in. Like you can't do anything about it. So like the whole like right side of the aircraft, which is like where everyone's going into this compound, is completely like defenseless. And I remember the pilot just being like freaking out about it. And he's like, tell them to hurry up. And I'm like, I think we'll be okay. Cause like the guys with the guns that are on our side are going to the bad guys with the guns. And so like, I think they're going to be in between us and them. So I think we'll be all right.
You know, and if I'm jumping to the wrong time period, let me know. But one of the things as you were kind of helping us prep for this, you mentioned kind of a fateful crew switch that you do where you don't end up on, and I think it was on a Helo. Was this your time in the Marine Corps still?
It was. So if we back up to 2001, remember I said I was like, hey, I want to get qualified and to go and be a aerial observer on this deployment with the squadron in September. So this is so that started probably a year out. So you got to do your aircrew water survival and all the other stuff, your flight physicals and get through all that. And so I'm going through my upgrades, and this is the summer. So this is probably, let me get this wrong. It's probably June or July, mid-June, mid-July. And so there's day, there's night. And so we're doing night stuff, and I'm almost done with all of my upgrades. I have like a final checkout. I think I might actually, no, I did do my check ride. I had to do it again because of the story. This is not a good, not a good one. No. So I got my check ride done at the very end. I'm doing some night cleanup, and I messed up there was a schedule thing that happened. They called me down, and so I broke crew rest to go work on something. I said, we'll just slip you. You can fly. You'll fly tomorrow night, not tonight, because we had to call you in a little bit early. It's like, okay. So I go home at the end of the day. It's probably like, 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And that was it. Well, I woke up the next morning, and I'm driving to work, and I'm listening to the news, and like there was a helicopter crash last night in New River. And I'm like, oh man, like I wonder who that was. I'm like, well, there's only 2 squadrons flying last night. So like it's the squadron I was in or this other squadron. Like they didn't even say like what type of helicopter it was. Like, okay. Well, by the time I got to work, it's like, okay, it was a CH-46. I'm like, okay, well, that was one squadron that was flying last night. And then I get to work, and I walk down to the squadron, and everyone's devastated, obviously. And then I look at the schedule and everything, and I was like, oh, I was supposed to be that third aircrew on that helicopter. So that crashed. The 2 pilots actually lived. They were doing what are called FCLPs, so a field carrier landing practice. It's basically like they have like a fake boat set up on the shore, and the pilots just practice like their setups to move into land. It's like a 45-degree kind of approach to the ship. So they do that. They're doing it at night, and they ended up putting it in the water and like a hard left turn, like a descending turn, and crashed right into the New River. And it crashed in like 10 feet of water or something like that. So the 2 pilots got thrown through the cockpit and actually lived because they got ejected out at impact. And then the 3 guys in the back all died. And so not only was I supposed to be on that, but the Stanoval guy who signed off on my check ride like the previous week actually died in that crash. And so he hadn't signed the paperwork yet for like my check ride. So I actually had to redo my check ride. And that's the only reason why I remember that. But yeah.
Dang. That's early on in your career to lose people
Yeah, it happened most of my deployments, there's someone that was lost. So so that was you think about your being invincible. I know a lot of people on your pod talk about like you just feel like, hey, I'm invincible, like didn't phase me, and then there's that one thing like, ooh,
this is real.
Like this actually can happen. So I was, again, fortunate or unfortunate to have had that experience like really early in my career. So this is 2001. I had been in about 4 years at this point. So I joined in 97, and I ended up doing 25 years. So early on in my career, like that, you see the reality of it, and like how did it happen? There's a whole bunch of reasons why, but the causal factors, like never again. Again, if you treat that as a failure, I'm lucky to be alive, but you treat that as a failure of a process or execution, and you take that with you, all those failures with you to propel you forward. So.
Sounds like something that you're going to like manifest later when you're in the Air Force, kind of pulling that forward. When you're in Afghanistan, do you find yourself pulling the trigger at all on any of these?
A little bit. A lot of it was just there. Again, back then it was different. You could definitely tell, and we'll probably talk about it later because I did 5 deployments. You could definitely tell over the course of 2001. I think the last people in Afghanistan I was there was 2014. So got to see a 13-year span of enemy tactics kind of evolve over time, which is interesting. But at the time, it was pretty benign. Yes, I probably one I can recall. Maybe once or twice. It wasn't that much.
And yeah, I'm not trying to glorify this at all. Was it a shot on a person, or was it kind of covering fire?
Just covering fire.
Yeah. Because I can imagine at that age, that's, it's a very different thing to have to take a life at that point.
And it was a much different situation than you like fast forward a couple years in like the Battle of Fallujah. Right. So I ended up different story. I ended up being in parts of that. So
were you still a Marine then?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Please.
Okay. So we come back from Afghanistan. I had reenlisted, like I told you. Well, part of that drug deal for reenlistment was like, hey, I need to get serious about school. And the I call him the career jammer, the career planner. Like, what can you do for me? Right? He's like the guy on the squadron is trying to keep you to stay on. It's like, we can get you a duty station of your choice. I'm like, okay, I want to go to Hawaii. And then at the time we had aviation units there that didn't deploy. They were like literally on an island in the middle of the ocean, just living it up. Right. Like, I want to go there. So, okay, we'll do that. So, and turns out they had a lot of colleges on the island because the island's small and all the services are there. So like you're pretty good odds of getting a degree. So, anyway, so I end up in Hawaii. Same exact thing kind of happens. Hey, we're actually going to start deploying to Japan as part of this unit deployment rotation. We haven't done this in a long time. They had sent like the first one up there. It was like, hey, you're going to lead the second one. I said, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I want to do what I did before. I'll go join a squadron and go fly. And all I had were CH-53Ds on the island. So I got qualified in that as well. So I was kind of dual qualified, if you will, to kind of help them out as an extra set of hands. Same kind of thing as I did on the East Coast. So deployed from Hawaii. This is 2004. 2004. Deployed from Hawaii to Japan. So I back up. So to deploy from Hawaii, I'm a part of a maintenance unit. So I get detached and then reattached to the CH-53 flying unit. That unit creates a detachment because the whole squadron doesn't deploy, but a detachment does. So I'm a detachment within a detachment. This will be important. We deploy up to Japan to then reattach to local units there. So we worked there for probably like 3 weeks maybe. And I said, pack up your stuff. You're going on deployment. I'm like, I'm already on deployment. They're like, no, we're gonna attach the 53s, the Hawaii 53s to the 31st MU. And like the CH-53s at the time, like the Deltas didn't deploy on the MUs. Like we don't do that. Like we are now, like pack your stuff. So I got attached to then the 31st MU, which is actually a part of a different thing. So I'm like 4 or 5 separations away of like who I work for. So like pack your stuff. So we leave Japan on a boat, and then go to Iraq. So then we go into Kuwait. We're in Kuwait for a while. We get up to Iraq. We're based in Al-Assad. This is right at the time where the second Battle of Fallujah was happening. And man, at the time it was, I did a lot of maintenance because there's a lot of maintenance to be done. There's a lot of helicopters getting shot down and crashed. At Al-Assad at the time, there was like a graveyard of just helicopters that had been shot down and just dismantled, and just rows of them. And there's like hundreds and hundreds of bullet holes, RPG hits, just like carcasses that had been just, crash and burn and recovered. There's a lot. It was way different than the beginning of, Afghanistan. So I did a few, not a lot. I did a few missions during that. Some of them way up north, like Tikrit, Al-Qaim, 1 or 2 into Fallujah at the time. And, but most of it, yeah. So most of the time though, I was spent trying to fix the helicopters because there was a lot of stuff going on. So it would get so bad. I remember there was one mission in particular. I think it was a Fallujah mission. I came back in like a post flight, like just counting bullet holes. And I'm like, oh man, it was like 20 something bullet holes. We had a guy get, you get shot by RPGs. We had I don't know if the Army was like this, but you had these chicken plates you would wear. Like these, like literally, like this is before, like it's like SAFI plate's not going to work for aircrew. Like you need a steel like plate that with like 550 cord over you, like to like protect you. So we had a guy get shot in the chest by an RPG, like through the window, like as it was flying, like the perfect like BB. It hit his like steel plate, like knocked him out cold. It dudded. It like ricocheted and like went out through the helicopter. Like, yeah.
Those things, they happen. Like, I think people will listen to that and be like, nah, that couldn't happen. Like when we were in Afghanistan, there was a Kiowa pilot who took a round in one side of his helmet and it literally went around the whole like top of his head and exited the other side. And he lived like completely fine. Yeah. But these projectiles do weird things once they're released.
Yeah. I remember dropping, it's crazy. The human, like life is weird. I remember dropping a 500-pound bomb, like directly on like a group of like 8 to 10 people. All 8 to 10 people ran away.
That happened to us all the time with Hellfires.
You'd see them like they get thrown up in the air. It's like a cartoon almost. Like they get thrown up in the air, they all land and they kind of get dazzled and they all just take off as squirters. Like, oh, I don't even know what's going on.
I didn't know that could happen with a 500-pounder. I just assumed it was better than that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, we're getting ahead. That's years later.
That's super interesting though, that you were there. Like Fallujah, I think many would argue is probably one of the most intense battles of GWAT to have been there for.
Yeah, I was definitely not in the middle of it, but you could like, we were seeing day in, day out because we're bringing people in and out and you could see that they were doing the maintenance on the helicopters. It was definitely sobering to see. And it was interesting is when I went to Hawaii, I was one of the first, because we were the first people in Afghanistan. I was like the only person on the base who had like recent combat. Our sergeant major was in like Panama. I mean, like that was it. Like, so it was, there was, when we went to Iraq, then I actually didn't, that month deployment I was gone about 6 months. I was supposed that the unit ended up being deployed for a whole year unexpectedly. I came home. It was a whole funny story. I came home to go to the Air Force because I remember I told you I went to Hawaii to finish my college degree. Fun, interesting story. Yada, yada, yada. Got a college degree, applied to the Air Force. And, back to your thing about aviation, like, oh, what do you want to do? Like, well, it's like a tech sergeant enlisted recruiter. And he's the only person on the island does like officer sessions. Like, well, like it's the Air Force. I probably should want to fly. And he's like, yeah, that sounds right. It's like, okay, so you want to be a pilot? I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's what people do, right? Like this, I can tell you, just stumbling.
Yeah, it wasn't like this burning desire. Nope, you'd seen something like
made
you want to do it.
So like, okay, like let's look at this. And so at the time, the Air Force, which is funny looking back, the Air Force, like, oh, we actually have like too many pilots. Like we have so many pilots. Like the selection rate, you have to have like these pilot ratings, this, and this. And then even then, it's like you have a 15% chance of getting selected. I'm like, well, and then the way that you do these selections, it takes a long time. And the other curveball I had was I still had an enlistment contract. So I was working all of these other things to be able to like curtail an enlistment contract to accept a commission in a different service. So it wasn't like the same service. So a lot of weird nuances there. I could tell a whole hour just about that. But anyway, so they're like, well, like what else can you get flies? Like, well, you can be a navigator. This thing has like a 95% selection rate. I'm like, wow, that sounds dumb. Like, I don't want to do that. Like, well, there's this other thing called a weapons systems officer. I'm like, ooh, that sounds cool. Like, what is it? Like, well, I don't know. Cause, but the paper here says that you could be flying on a B-1, or an F-15, as a backseater or something. I'm like, oh, cool. Like, okay, sign me up for that. They're like, well, no, you can't sign up for it. You have to sign up as a navigator. And then like, there's another process once you in the Air Force that you can like apply and maybe do that. Like, all right, I'll roll my dice. I'll do it. So I ended up applying. I was coming as a navigator.
What was the discussion with your wife about that one?
Well, obviously it's a discussion. So at the time we're like, hey, I was finishing my degree. What do you want to do? And we sat and we're looking at it like, well, I'm going to have like 9 years in. And if we want to do the rest, we're halfway to retirement for, a pension. If I want to stay to 20 years, like probably want to do it as an officer, and then probably want to do it as like live a different lifestyle than we've been living, honestly.
And that's the Air Force.
Yeah. So we're like, oh, officer, Air Force, like check and check. Right. So, I mean, at the time, and, not taking anything away from the Marine Corps, it was a great experience, but, I had been in my first, certainly by the end of my second enlistment, by the end of my first enlistment, I had more experiences than people did 20 years. So if I looked around, I'm like, well, if I stay in an extra 10 or 15 years, like I can point to exactly what job I'll have, like that job. Like I'll be so miserable because I'm not challenging myself. I've done everything that I kind of sought out, not even what I sought out to do, but the just amazing experiences that I had. And then when I got sent to Iraq, I got a whole nother set. you want some? Here's some more. So,
was there something on the Air Force side that you were like, yeah, if I'm flying, that's worth it 10 years from now, if I can look ahead?
Well, again, I no strategy. I was like, that sounds fun. Like, not like, hey, what, can you turn that into like a, be an airline pilot? Like, no, I don't know. Like, I didn't even think about that. I didn't know anything about it. So, I do the Air Force officer test, do pretty good on that, and do all the paperwork, submit the paperwork, go on deployment. I'm in Iraq, and I get an email from the recruiter. He's like, congratulations, you have been selected for Air Force officer training. I'm like, awesome. I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I was trying to do. What I didn't factor in was the next sentence. It's like, hey, you have 30 days to report to MEPS. I'm like, what? So I'm like, I write him back. I'm like, well, like, I don't think you understand my situation. Like I told you, I was going to be gone for a little bit. I'm in Iraq. Like, what do I have to go to MEPS for? I'm already in the military. Like, oh, you have to do a MEPS physical. You have to get like a military doctor has to give you an entrance exam. Like, but I'm in the military now. Reference, I'm in Iraq. Like, I don't know how else to tell you this, but I'm qualified.
Yeah, it's not like you're out in Hawaii chilling.
And it's not a flight physical. It's like the MEPS physical everyone has to go through. I'm like, what? How is this even a discussion? I'm like, oh, let me go talk to my boss. And as you might imagine in the military, they're like, sorry, there's just no way that we can solve this problem. There's no doctor in the whole entire world, certainly not on your base. That's your flight, your
flight surgeon.
Your flight surgeon, certainly not your flight surgeon, but no doctor in the entire world that can do this MEPS exam except the 2 or 3 old men that are at the MEPS physical center in Honolulu. And so you have to be here in now 28 days, because if you don't do your physical within your 30 days, then they rescind the offer, and can't make this stuff up. Yeah. So I'm like, well, here I am. Remember I told you a little bit ago, and I'm like several orders removed from like any chain of command, nothing. So I'm like, who do I, and I'm an E5, by the way, I'm still an E5. So I was a pretty senior E5. Like, well, I got to find a way to leave my combat deployment and get back to Hawaii in like 28 days with no chain of command. So I worked a lot of drug deals and got on an Angel flight that was carrying bodies out of Iraq down into Kuwait. Ended up at the terminal, and every step of the way, people are like, I can't help you, but I can get you to the next thing. And so I hitchhiked the flight. I made sure I wasn't going to be like marked AWOL or anything. I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. And there's a warrant officer that worked adjacent to me, but it wasn't really too involved. He's like, yep, I understand what we're trying to do. Totally makes sense. Like, I got you. Like, just keep me posted. And we'll like make sure on your manifest reporting, like you're not like marked AWOL, like you're not dead or missing. Like we know you're trying to go. Like, okay. So I get down to Kuwait, and there was a Marine liaison office like in the terminal at the international airport at the time. And like, yeah, I'm supposed to talk to you. I need a plane ticket, like home. Like, you can't go home. What are you talking about? So like, oh, and so finally, yada, 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 got a plane ticket to fly from Kuwait to London, to Atlanta, to LA, to Honolulu. And, a couple of days later, I'm at home. I make it back. My wife and kids pick me up from the airport in Honolulu. And then, the next, I think 5 or 6 days later, I'm doing my MEPS thing. And then I'm doing all my thrashing and paperwork trying to transition from the Marine Corps to the Air Force.
I can't believe they let you out of the war zone.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Like we're the pilots and the other crew chiefs, they're like, wait, you could just like head on out.
Yeah. When I left, so it was interesting. It's like, hey, the way that we had deployed into, like, I didn't come into this war like the right way.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to leave the right way, right?
No.
So I'm like, so I still have stuff on the boat because we left the ship, and I'm like, well, like, can someone just like mail that to me or something? Like, just cut the lock
that
on
is
my
so military.
Yeah,
you know,
cut
like
the
that
lock and
story.
berthing and just mail it to me. Like, I don't know. So I actually had to borrow a uniform to leave because all I had was what we left the ship with. So I have like desert flight suits. Well, it's like standard Marine Corps. It's like, sorry, you can only travel in camis. You can't travel in a flight suit. I'm like, I don't even have a uniform. So I had to go borrow, I borrowed like a top from one person, a bottom from another person, and a hat. I don't even think I had a hat. And I got that close to like being like, okay, I've got a uniform. I've got everything worked out. You can't make this stuff up. I'm at the terminal and I'm like, I've done everything I can to like pull off these consecutive miracles. And I'm at the terminal and there's a Gunny comes up to me. He's like, hey, Devil Dog, like, where's your rank? I'm like, oh God, don't even get started with me. I could not find the metal pins to put the rank on my collar for the uniform that I had to borrow to like leave the country. I'm like, yes, I do not have.
Oh, where you mentioned earlier that these people that you knew from Tampa come back into play as you go into the Air Force. Is this the colonel, lieutenant colonel that you meet?
Oh, yes. I completely forgot about that.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, Mint Mobile, and we'll get right back to this combat story. Have you ever thought about why your wireless bill is so damn expensive? It's all just radio waves, and how much can a radio wave really cost? Seems like Big Wireless got together and decided, $100 a month? I think they'll buy it. What choice do they have? Now, thanks to Mint Mobile, you do have a choice. Right now, Mint Mobile has wireless plans starting at $15 a month. That's unlimited talk and text plus data for $15 a month. I wanted to read a comment from one of our listeners about Mint Mobile, and they said, just to let you know, I used your code to sign up for the 4-month package at Mint Mobile, and it's working great. It was an excellent second carrier to use while traveling, good coverage and fast speeds. Just so you know, you are promoting a decent service to help support the show. And I think that says it all. I noticed the same great quality as I was traveling. It worked perfectly. I still have it on my phone today, and it's worked out so well. So to get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/combat story. That's mintmobile.com/combat story. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/combat story. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. And now back to this combat story.
So part of the, talking to my parents, like, here's what I want to do. And I was like, yeah, I need to get letters of recommendation. So like the higher the rank, the better. That's what this Air Force recruiter is telling me. And so, can you ask the Marine guy that was in our church, whatever, 5 or 6 years ago? And it's like, yeah. And actually he's in Hawaii. So it was like worked out perfect. So my parents had come out before I went on deployment. And he was a colonel at the time now, down in Pearl Harbor, I think. And we actually met up and everything. Like, yeah, here's what I'm trying to do. And it's, oh, that's cool. Well, now I'm like, hey, now I need a letter. So he got me a letter. So I'm like, hey, I need to find, it was great. I talked to him. Like, I remember his North, his last name, I think it was North. And he got me this letter. And my parents,
not Ollie North.
No. And so my parents like, hey, like we could ask the Patel brothers to write you a letter. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, the twins. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I know, I grew up with them. They're like the old guys at church. They're always jokesters. They're twins. Like, yeah, I'm pretty sure they're in the Air Force. Let me go ask. I'm like, all right. Like, again, living my life and just like oblivious. So I come back and like, yeah, like sure, we'll get you a letter. And so at this time, I can now Google these people. And so I start looking them up. I'm like, holy shit. Like these guys grew up with me. I didn't even know it. So they were twin brothers. One's a retired 2-star, one's a retired 3-star.
No way.
They were the first pilots in the Thunderbirds. like the first. They were like the left wing and right wing, like twin brothers. The first ever, like in the team that the Thunderbirds came from, they were actually stood up that team. There's a whole history of it. This goes back to like the 50s. And I was like, what? Yeah. Like I had no idea that they were like, I think one of them was a POW. Like it's like legendary careers, like just living right next to me, didn't even know it. Like grew up with them, didn't even know it. So they actually wrote letters. So my letters of recommendation to get in the Air Force were like, they were pretty stacked. I thought.
Dang.
I was like, oh yeah.
How cool.
Yeah.
Ooh. And then, so as you go into the Air Force, are you hoping for, do you have expectation now? You say it's kind of like blissful ignorance, but are you starting to just embrace like, hey, I'm going to be a pilot here, right? I mean, I'm going to be in this community now.
Try to embrace was probably the thing. So I ended up the first in officer training school. They have like posters of aircraft everywhere. And I just to be honest with you. So here's me. Like I tell you, I'm this far into the story of like, I'm going to be in the Air Force. I'm going to do this. I couldn't tell you like, hey, that's a C-17 or that's an F-15. No kidding. I couldn't tell you the difference between F-15 and F-16. Couldn't tell you. I have no idea.
But for sure, the other candidates there probably knew all of them.
Oh, yeah.
All of them.
And I'm like, hey, like, how can you tell? Like that one's, yeah, it's got one tail and that one's got two. I'm like, oh, yeah, it makes sense. Okay. So that's like my level of preparation, like going through life like this. It's, yeah.
What's the experience like going into the Air Force then, coming out of the Marines? And combat. I mean,
yeah,
you've just been in the real deal.
So I went from, Iraq to Maxwell Air Force Base. Basically, I had to move all my stuff out of Hawaii back to Florida. And then interestingly, I had to process through the Tampa MEPS because that was my home of record to then go to Maxwell. Well, I thought I had timed everything like perfectly. It's the standard. It's just funny because I did it when I was like 18. I'm doing it again now. And like whatever it was, 9 years later, wife drops me off, girlfriend at the time, same person drops me off and like, okay. Like we stay overnight at a hotel, with like all the poolies and stuff. And the next day, like go to get on the bus and they're like, hey, Mike Benitez. I'm like, yep. Like you can't get on this bus. I'm like, I'm this close. I'm like this close. Like, what do you mean? They're like, well, you don't actually leave the Marine Corps until midnight. And so you can't actually get on this bus until like 1 minute after you've left the Marine Corps.
Come on.
I'm like, are you serious? They're like, yeah. So you actually can't go to OTS till tomorrow. I'm like, but I need to be there like today. Like, not going to happen. This universe, it is just simply not possible that you can step foot on this bus. So I'm telling you, like, story of my life, it's crazy. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm just going to show up to OTS a day late. And for anyone knows how like in processing works, it's very, there's a process, there's a method, there's a whole like plan of like, these people show up this time, these buses arrive this time, these are the people that are showing up, and this is the people that are going to escort them. And it's like, it's all regimented except for me. So I show up late. And they're like, I remember showing up and they're like, oh, look at this fucking guy. Like, oh, Mr. Special, huh? I'm like,
because for sure the guy on the bus didn't tell the other people like at in processing that.
So I ended up taking a flight. So I had to fly the next day. I flew up to Atlanta and then from then got on another bus from like a group of poolies to go from Atlanta to Maxwell. And so I showed up and I'm like kind of by myself a day late and going to this in processing and everyone's giving me like the stinky eye, like, this is how we're going to start, huh? Like, yes, sir. Yeah, like, sure. So another fun part of it was if you are one of the things that the Air Force does for OTS is they actually screen of who's prior enlisted. And so if you're a guardsman, things like that, or enlisted airman, they know, like they have all of your records because you're in their system, right? What they don't have is any knowledge of anyone else who's prior enlisted from another service. So for the first like 2 or 3, probably 2 weeks, first 2 weeks, there was probably 4 of us in my class that were from their Navy, Marine, and Army. They're like, no one knew that we were prior. And like, clearly this isn't the first time anyone from another, but they just didn't ask. So we're just like, well, like, I'm just going to play dumb. And like, why didn't you tell me? Like, you didn't ask. Yeah. So my my TI, which are like drill instructors, but what is TI? TI, right? MTI. There you go. Like the drill instructors for the Air Force. So we have like enlisted, NCOs or drill instructors basically for the officer training school, and they're yelling at us, teaching us how to march and all that. And this guy, and he was full of fire. Like, oh, it's a great guy, full of fire, vinegar, loved it. So it was probably like a month in, and he had realized that I was like my put the pieces together. Like we had a uniform inspection one day, and I had like different ribbons and combat aircrew wings, and he was like, kind of walks away, and I get called in his office a couple hours later, and he's like, sit down. He's like, he tells me his life story. He's like, man, he's like always wanted to join the Marine Corps. And it's like, I was like, oh, this is crazy. So he ended up being, it was like, yeah, this is great. Thanks. So we were sharing stories. He's like, all right. He's like, we're out there. It's like business. I'm like, yeah, I got it. So yeah, the OTS was, in OTS, you had to apply to them become a weapons systems officer. This is where that other part comes in.
And just real quick. So at that time, you're with people who are on the navigator path, but a spinoff from that is the weapon system.
So so they said, hey, who's in this class? Who are all the navigator candidates? And it's, I don't know, 30 people, call it, in this OTS class. All right, out of those 30, like you and they bring us all in, like, okay, if you want, you can apply to track this other program. Of the 30 of you, you are eligible to apply for this program. We're going to pick 3 of you. It was something like that. Actually, I think it was 3. And you have to fill out a thing of like, here are the questions you need to answer. And then you're going to have an interview, and we're going to bring in people from Pensacola, which are the instructors for this program. You have to sit in this thing and do this interview. I'm like, I think I'll be okay.
I feel like 3 out of 30 is not 95%. As you were promised.
Well, it's 95%. It's a recruiter, right? It's 95% you're going to get into the Air Force as a navigator, right?
Okay, gotcha.
So from then, it's like, he's like, I don't know. Afterwards.
Then you're back to,
and I was like, okay. So I'll take my chances. So again, story of my life, just kind of roll the die. I'm like, yeah, all right, I'll try that. So do the interview, and it's like, yeah, you got a spot to Pensacola. That doesn't mean you're going to be in the F-15. It means you can be in the B-1 or the F-15. Oh, by the way, curveball, we're now sending Air Force guys to Prowlers. So you could get a Prowler spot as a backseater. I'm like, what? So I go through Pensacola. One of the guys that was in our class or class after us actually got the Prowler slot. I got the Strike. Me and actually another guy in our OTS class, both of us got Strike Eagle spots. And then another guy got a B-1.
Sounds like you knew you wanted to do the Strike Eagle, though.
Remember I told you like F-15 versus F-16? Like I was like, well, like the fighter seems like it's the cooler thing. And I remember someone was like, well, the bomber, I remember seeing the picture of it, and I'm like, oh, I mean, that's pretty cool.
It's a cool looking
That's
bird.
Cool. And I remember like, well, I see the 2 pilots, like the little cockpit. Like, where would I sit? And like, oh yeah, you see that little Coke bottle size like cube? They call it the day-night indicator. That's the window in the back seat. It's like by your knee. Like you get to sit back there. I'm like, well, that doesn't sound fun. So like, I don't want to do that. So that was one of the, and you really didn't know that kind of info until you got down to Pensacola and started talking to the instructors, because they're B-1 instructors, Strike Eagle guys, and it's joints. There's Navy guys. So we had like Tomcat backseaters that were still there. Yeah. They're old, 80s stories from the 80s and stuff. It's great.
When you get through that training and get to your first unit, what is the welcome like? Hazing, welcome, bringing you in to your first unit?
Well, we had the training course first. So kind of skipping forward. It was pretty good. I at the time, like, man, our first, you fall in love with your first squadron, right? Man, it was happy to finally be done with training. Not realizing, hey, you're going to go through a whole bunch more training.
You're just starting again.
Turns out aviation is nothing but training and upgrades.
That is true, kids. If you're listening.
Newsflash. The sorties that aren't upgrades are the ones that you cherish. You're just like, there's no grade sheets. There's not like, just go actually like learn, practice and learn. It was well received. I remember the commander of the squadron had just taken over, and he was the the DO, the director of operations, the second command of the training squadron that I was in. And so, I was just moving across the street. So I was in 3 different squadrons in Seymour Johnson, North Carolina. I was in the 333rd for training. Then I was in the 336 for operations for a few deployments. And then I moved another building over to then teach at the other training schoolhouse.
Oh, wow. So some stability, actually.
Yeah.
Not common. Well, it sounds like it might be more common in the Air Force. I don't know. Like,
it depends.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, it's like pockets.
Let's pick up from getting to your operational squadron for the first time. What is the squadron, and like, what's the personality of that school? Like, is there a kind of culture there? How would somebody else look at that squadron and describe it? Like, what's that squadron like when you get there?
Morale was sky high. It was.
What year is it? Yeah, it was really important.
So, and this is actually where I met Tom. So he went through the same training course that I did in the 333rd, but he was 1 class ahead of me. And each class is like 8 or 10 months long. So he's basically like almost a year ahead of me. They were on deployment. The first squadron, the Rockets, the 336, they were on deployment while my training course was happening. And so they were going to come back from deployment. Then our class, that was the people in our class that were going there, were then basically joined the squadron during their turnover. So deployment, what happens is you keep people till you have continuity on deployment. When the deployment comes back, the people that you've extended to keep, they all leave. And so you have to rebuild the squadron before you go on another deployment. So they were in the big like exodus and grab new people. So we were in the flux of the new people. But morale was sky high because it just came back. And from Bagram, they were I think they were the 2nd squadron ever, maybe the 3rd by this time. The Strike Eagles had moved up into Bagram from where were they at before? IUD, I think. So they were actually in country doing operations in country, which is at the time was like, oh, this is unusual. We're going to put the airbase like in surrounded by the enemy. And like, yeah, that sounds right.
So is it kind of a successful deployment they were coming back?
Yeah, they were
from?
coming back from a successful deployment. Right. Morale's high. A lot of sharp people. Just the time and the people that were there. Like there was for the Air Force, we have weapons school, Air Force weapons school. For listeners who aren't aware, it's like Top Gun, except it's like twice as long, and it focuses on somewhat different things. But that's kind of that's your analogy. And so out of that, just as a proxy, and I remember this going back from that, there was like a 2-year period from the day that I showed up to like near the end of when I was in that squadron. We probably sent like 15 or 20 people to weapons school, which is like insane.
Wow.
Like the per capita, like the amount of like top caliber people that are all in the same thing, slightly on, 3, 6, 12 month offsets in their career trajectories. Like everyone just, it was a really amazing time to see a lot of amazing people all kind of growing.
Why
and
do
learning.
You think that is?
Timing. I mean, I just extremely fortunate to be in that squadron at that time with that many people that were just that caliber. And I remember showing up and being through all the stuff that I've been in. I remember showing up and, they're sizing me up while I'm sizing them up too. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I remember sizing up and like, I'm in the right place.
Yeah.
Like, these are my people.
That's cool. How long do you have there until you go downrange? You get a longer training?
Year. It's about a year. Yeah.
And does that feel like enough time coming out of the schoolhouse?
It only was enough time because we had a lot of experience. We'd just come back. But if we were starting from zero, like I was telling you about, 9/11, we'd be like, I don't know what to do. In the type of missions that were being done, it was interesting because it's close air support, but it's really like air support. It's dynamic taskings, and it's close air support has a very specific definition. I would argue that from like most of the war in Afghanistan wasn't close air support. It was just some kind of air support. So, and that lended to a lot of other challenges and a lot of skill sets that just didn't exist. And so the Air Force, I can speak for the fighter community, traded one set of skills for another because that was what the situation warranted. And, as we left Afghanistan, I were trying to switch back to another set of skills. Syria, I could talk to that a little bit later. That was a different set of skills that the Air Force had just forgotten about for 20 years. So I was there too.
So what's the first, like, where are you at on that first deployment? What year is it?
What's
your role in the squadron?
So 2009, I was a lieutenant, and I remember this because I want to say I distinctly remember this. I was trying to get 336 flight hours in the Strike Eagle, that was the name of the squadron, before I pinned on captain, and I pinned on captain during the deployment. And at that time, you just show up to work the next day, and like no one cares. So that was the only reason I remember my experience level was because of that. So I probably had, I don't know, maybe 10 or 20 combat sorties at the time. Well, actually, probably a bit more than that.
When you pinned on, that's
yeah.
what you're saying.
So my first 30 or so combat sorties were as a lieutenant in the Strike Eagle before I pinned on captain. And so, yeah, and I'd say it's probably that, because by then we were doing a little bit more advanced stuff, and I'd made a lot of mistakes, but also had some interesting stories as a lieutenant. And then I ended up flying a couple hundred missions.
Well, yeah, let's talk through some of those early ones. Like, as a lieutenant, you're just in country. You've been to war before, but obviously a very different perspective this time. And and could you give people some context? Like, you're a backseater. What is it you're doing in the aircraft?
Great question. So in Afghanistan and those kinds of scenarios, it's 2-seat fighter. So Tom's a front seater, I'm a back seater. Just happened to work out that way. We're great friends. The front seater is doing obviously like pilotage. Interestingly, also navigation for the most part, and doing external coordination like tankers, taskings, things like that. In the backseater, I'm doing the sensors, weapons, and kind of down and in. So when you hear like the dude call sign talking to the guy on the ground, it's the backseater. It's not the front seater. So,
unless very rare circumstances,
very rare,
I assume that the pilot's coming on.
Yeah, and it happens. It's not like sacrilege if it happens. Like if it's warranted, it needs it happens. And I got a story about that.
Okay.
So one of the stories when I was a lieutenant, where I told you, like, well, I probably flew 30 or so, maybe a little bit more missions as a lieutenant. I know this because I have a couple of stories as a lieutenant. One of them was we talk about radios. We were sent down to Helmand Province. This is 2009, and I'm number 2. It's another lieutenant and I. So we have 2 lieutenants and a jet, which is like. It's the only thing more riskier on a combat mission than putting 2 lieutenants in a Strike Eagle is putting 2 lieutenant colonels in a Strike Eagle.
That's great.
There's data to prove it. So we're doing pretty good as lieutenants, and so the squadron is like, all right, like we had there's a whole risk mitigation strategy because we have the luxury of having 2 cockpits. We typically pair an inexperienced backseater with an experienced front seater and vice versa. So like it's the law of averages plays out. The strong will help the weak. The inexperienced will grow into the experience. Well, we were doing pretty good. And so they said, hey, you guys can fly together. Like, it's great. So we're on a night mission. We take off from Bagram. We fly all the way down the Helmand. And at the time, Helmand Province is kicking. That was 2008. So we have Widow, which are the JTACs from the British. And the Marines were there, but they weren't up to speed as much as pervasive as the British were. I mean, that was like Widowland, we used to call it. So west of Kandahar, Nadi Ali area, and they're doing like block by block fighting. And we show up down there, and it's a move to engage, right? So we're moving block by block to engage. We want them to shoot at us, so then we find out who the bad guys are. We can just shoot back. Right. Which is different, right? That's an offensive operation. A lot of Afghanistan was defensive operation, hearts and minds. But at the time, like, no, we need to sweep the city. So we go down there. There's 2 of us, two jets, and we check in. And in most scenarios, you'd think there'd be like a whole stack of air power. Not the case. It's just the 2 jets, just the 2 of us down there. And apparently, like the scope of this operation wasn't very well captured in the air support request. So our 2 ship goes down there, And we check in, and there's the TOC, which has a JTAC, and he's okay. We're going to pass you to these freaks, and there's like 11 JTACs spread across the city.
Are you serious?
I'm like, what?
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just a hot mess.
Could I ask you real quick? I did not cover this with Tom. Most people listening have heard of a JTAC, but just could you briefly explain what that role is, since they're integral to what we're going to be talking about?
So JTAC is a qualification. It's not a job. It is a joint terminal air controller. It's the person who is certified to control the employment of weapons from the air. So when you hear of like an A-10 doing close air support, he's talking to a guy qualified on the ground. That's a JTAC.
Yep, exactly. All right, perfect. So 11 or, there's
Multiple
multiple JTACs.
JTACs. And so the TOC is like controlling this, and they're all frequency split. So of course, none of the JTACs can talk to each other. They're all different frequencies. This is not good. And they're trying to get shot at. So they're moving to engage across these, block by block. And so there's, and as they're opening ticks, because we can't hear all the JTACs, we only hear the TOC. Our data link, the way that it had set up at the time, when someone would open a troops in contact over their the air support net, it would populate like a little track on our data link, so we can see like, oh, and it would have a connotation like, oh, that's tick, Alpha 1 or Alpha Bravo 1 or whatever it was the connotation at the time. And so like, okay, like there's a tick open, and there's another tick open, and there's another,
and it's just showing up on your
and they're
screens.
Like, they're all around us, like below us. So I'm like, oh my goodness, like there's only 2 jets here. So, and our flight lead realizes this, all strong, man. Both the pilot and Wizzo actually ended up going to weapons school. Great guys. So the flight lead's like, we're going to yo-yo ops. We're going to go to the tanker. We're going to grab a tanker. We'll make sure we get gas. You guys stay here and like start sorting us out. I'm like, okay. So 2 lieutenants, 1 jet over Nadia Lee during this, just ticks everywhere. And not all ticks are the same, right? Some are a little bit more urgent. And this, back then, they didn't have prize and ticks. They moved to a system where it's like, no, it's a priority, but it's not an actual like being shot at. At the time, like anyone could open a tick and it was hard to close. So there's ticks everywhere. We're trying to figure out which ones are real, which ones are like.
Is this night?
Yes.
Nighttime?
Oh yeah, it's night.
It's all nighttime.
And it's night. And it's night. So you can see, like with the MVGs, you can see where the firefights are. Like, okay, well, that's the tick. That tick has like, I could see the firefight through my gogs. Like, that's a real tick. This one, I don't see anything, but I don't know. And so we're trying to work through that. And the JTAC and the TOC's like, hey, I've got 2 ticks that we need support like ASAP. Like, there's only 1 jet. Well, our jet has 3 radios in the way that we had set them up. So me and this guy in the front, like, we have 1 targeting pod, we have 1 jet, and we have 2 ticks that are like, these are the 2 ticks we need help now, and we can't wait for a flight lead. It's like, well, all right, we're gonna switch off of the flight lead, our common radio from the flight lead. We'll tell the flight lead we are leaving this channel because we need this frequency. We basically have 1 radio devoted to 1 JTAC, 1 radio devoted to the other JTAC, and then the 3rd radio is devoted to the JTAC like at the TOC that's like coordinating everything, so we actually know what's going on. And I'm like, well, I can't talk to all 3 JTACs at the same time. So like, let's turn the TOC JTAC down. We tell them, hey, we're gonna push those freaks and work them. We're gonna monitor this, but we're not gonna have the volume up. So like, okay, now I've got 2 JTACs on 2 radios and 2 ticks, 1 targeting pods, like 1 sensor, 1 jet. So like, how about this? How about you take this radio and this tick, and then I'll take this radio and this tick. Like, okay. So now we split the radios, split the cockpit duties. So the pilot is talking to the JTAC on 1 radio. He has my radio turned down, so he has no idea what I'm doing. I have his radio turned down, and I'm talking to the other JTAC and the other tick. And these JTACs are like maybe 5 miles apart.
Have you trained for this before?
No, there's no training for this whatsoever. We're just trying to problem solve. So like, okay, like, and so I have no idea what he's doing. He has no idea what I'm doing, but the ticks are close enough that we can fly kind of like this extended orbit and actually you can move the center back and forth. So as we get back to, and we only did like two or 3 orbits maybe. So we're trying to figure out what's going on. We'd move the targeting pod from 1 tick to the other based on what side of the wheel we're on to figure out like, what can I see, what's going on? Because we're trying to make sense of what's going on. And so I remember going, we have a common, like an intercom, right? So we can just talk and everyone can hear us. So like, hey, I remember he says, hey, I'm getting a 9 line. I'm like, shut up, I'm getting a 9 line. I'm like, no, I'm getting a 9 line. Like, oh, we're getting 9 lines at the same time from 2 different JTACs on 2 different radios, and I can't hear his, he can't hear mine, and I don't have time to validate what his is. He doesn't have time to validate. So like, okay, like I turn it up to get his read back of the 9 line, not what the JTAC said, but what he said back, and then he turns mine up to get my read back. And like, okay, we have, and it's like danger close strafe and a at night in the city and a show of force because it's too close to strafe. Like we need a jet over this like right now. It's like, okay. So we're like, we tell our flight lead is just listening to all of this, and you just hear them like press, like continue, like they're giving us like, yep, keep going. So it was, again, like really good essay. They're getting gas on the tanker. So we end up rolling in and doing we like turn the radios up. We shift the radios. I'm like, dude, whatever we were, dude 1, dude 1-2 or dude 1-5, whatever we were, roll in and do this really low altitude show of force, and then pop up. So we do like a 5G pull, pop up, and then roll in to do a strafe pass danger close out of the pop. So go up, around, and back down. And so we were able to break contact with the show of force, break contact with the strafe, and then roll back to the talk, and the JTAC's like, okay, things settle down. And we did a couple other things, not that I can't remember through the rest of that sortie, but that was the 2. I was like, another day, another thing I've never trained for.
Can we talk? Hold up. So you do a strafing. Is this the one that's caught on camera?
No.
Okay. Well,
that's a different one. Yeah.
We'll hold that one. So you come in, basically what you're doing is you're going to service both ticks in one go.
Yeah.
But they're a few miles apart at night. So you come in low, do a low pass initially, show of force. And
so typically do a show of force. We'll pop out some flares to get people's attention at night. And it's obviously loud and fast. So we're at, call it 400 knots, 500 knots, something like that. And 500 feet or less, put out a bunch of flares, like noise, attention that typically gets people to stop doing what they're doing. And typically, this is back then, it evolves. So back then that would cause like you get a solid like 10 seconds of like what's going on. And that 10 seconds is typically enough time because the friendlies are expecting it, but the enemies are not. And so it's coming. And as soon as you're going to get like 10 seconds that you can maneuver to break contact or maneuver to get to cover or something like that. So the show of force is, although it sounds like you're just doing a low speed pass, like if you're not expecting it, and you're in the middle,
so loud.
It's so disorienting for about, again, like 10 seconds is what you really get out of it.
Especially at night. And if you're the enemy, you don't know if like, okay, I hear the jets, is a round coming in now.
That's right.
So you do the slow pass, and then like, what is the maneuver to get you into it? Because you're saying a danger close strafe coming off the back end of this.
Yeah,
right?
it was, so we obviously we're down at altitude. We have to climb back up to like 10,000 feet, something like that. And then it's a left turn to kind of come right back down. And at the time, our strafe parameters were a little weird. They changed over time. We had a fatality actually on that deployment, probably less than a month later, doing very something similar. So it was like 30-degree strafe pass, something like that. Then
30-degree dive.
Yeah, 30-degree dive.
Sounds like not a lot, but I just know from being in the Apache, like a few degrees starts adding up very quickly. 30 is serious.
Yeah, we used at the time we had a window, and each squadron had their own standard. It was pretty dumb. But like 10 to 40 degrees was like your allowance of error, like, which is just insane. A 10-degree dive versus a 40-degree dive, like
very
that is
different.
a significant event if you're on one extreme or the other. We have there's standards now in place that are different, but back then there was no standard. Every squadron had their own like good idea of what they thought was right, and so that's what we did. So there was a lot of sloppiness that was allowed, and honestly, like cost some lives.
But you pull up, you say like 10,000 feet. How fast are you going now? You're bleeding.
Oh yeah, you're bleeding all your energy. Yeah. So then you roll in, and your strafe pass is, you call it 30 degrees at 450 knots, something like that. And then your open fire, ceasefire, and then you do your safe escape, so not hit the ground and fly into any of the frag. And that's like, again, 4Gs or so. It's 5G. 5G used to be like the daytime thing where you have your NVGs on. And so like you really don't want to pull 5Gs, because then the worst thing in the world, you've probably seen this. So like if you pull a lot of Gs, or, yank the collective in the helicopter, your NVGs fall off. Where are they going to go? Crush your nuts.
I mean, do you not have them like Lanyard?
No.
No. All right. I think we would often have him on a lanyard in case something knocked him loose.
I remember
you can put him back.
When I was on Helo's lanyard, because you'd knock him off just like
he would just move and hit something.
But yeah, in the jet, not so much.
Was that your first danger close?
I don't think so.
Do you remember your first one?
No.
Really? They just did so many, they just run together?
Well, yeah. Some of, like I was telling you a little bit off camera, like some of them are memorable, like because they're like challenging, and some are just like, here's your 9 line, like don't screw it up. And you're like, okay. So dangerous and difficult don't necessarily translate from the air perspective from that. Some of them were like, hey, this is not good. But yeah, it dropped quite a bit. Well, not quite a bit. I don't know. If I had to guess, probably less than 10% danger close drops. And that was a little different in the, like when you're talking to Stinger and like later on in Syria when they're just dropping entire city blocks, like those are, 50% plus danger close. So,
how important is that relationship with you and the front seater?
Make it or break it. Make it or break it. If you're not on the same page, it's an interesting, when we talked with like in the fighter community, the Air Force has basically single seat fighters except for the Strike Eagle. The Navy has 1 and 2 seat Super Hornets. And there's an interesting thing that happens. The power of having 2 people in the cockpit, there's the synergistic effect. So 1 + 1 = 3. And then there's like, it just counters each out. So like 1 times 0 is 0. Like it doesn't.
It can be really bad.
It can be really bad, right? So so there's good days and bad days, and no one has a perfect sortie. So we make sure that we have a good understanding of expectations, standards, if this and that, contracts between them, and then we debrief. Right? So hey, here's what I screwed up today. Here's what I saw from you. Here's how we're gonna fix it next time. And then we pair people together. So you'd fly together. In training you don't, but for combat you do. So you have that strong crew coordination. Mm-hmm. That might be one of the reasons why, although Tom and I we've been in 4 squadrons together. So we've been in 2 operational squadrons, a training squadron, and a test squadron. We probably have like 4,500 Strike Eagle hours between the 2 of us, and I think we may have flown in the same jet like 5 times ever, something like that. It's something. It's less than 10. It's definitely. Actually, towards the end of our career, we were both lieutenant colonels. Remember I told you about Risk and lieutenant colonels? We got to fly together quite a bit. Towards the end, I was dealing with a lot of health issues, so I was very gingerly on my my flying days at the end.
Interesting. All right. I hope you enjoyed that combat story with Pako. I think he's what every front seater wanted in the back seat in the F-15E. Just so accomplished, and round 1 is just a little peek at what he's done. Round 2 is chock full of combat experiences from the air, including how he earns his DFC, which is remarkable, and you feel like you're right there with him as he describes it. So I'm excited for you to hear it. As always, please check out our newsletter at combatstory.com/newsletter. You can help support us at Patreon at patreon.com/combatstory. And please do like, subscribe, comment. If you have the time and can leave us a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, I would greatly appreciate it. All of that helps get us out to more people, and we're continuing to try to build this platform. With that, a couple listener comments from Pako's very dear friend, Tom Moser, about his interview. And this is AMD Finn, Apple Podcast 5-star review. He says, my dad was a decorated combat pilot. He eventually died from some of the wounds sustained in service. He says, I love your podcast, as I'm sure my dad would have as well. And then S. Magavin says, I listen to quite a few podcasts in this genre. Orion just has a way about him that makes me feel like I'm sitting on the couch with a couple friends listening to their amazing stories. I appreciate that, because that's exactly how I feel listening to some of these incredible stories. And lastly, Brian Christopher 1776 on YouTube said, great interview, fellas. Learned a lot. Looking forward to part 2. Cheers. And that's obviously prepping for the Tom Moser part 2 interview, which hopefully many of you have heard since Pako and Tom go way back. But thank you so much for listening, supporting us, and I hope you have a great rest of the week or weekend wherever you are. Stay safe.